but I am really excited to do a family demo showing off the Memphis School Guide. Just kind of a quick introduction of like who I am, why I'm passionate about this work and school choice and the guide in general. So my name is Benjamin Friedlander. I'm the Associate Research Manager for the Memphis Education Fund, an advocacy group that just really tries to do all things to promote better school choices for students across Memphis. But before I was fortunate enough to move to Memphis, the best city in America, I worked in a couple of other school districts. So I've just kind of briefly outlined my work history below. I worked as a teaching aide and coach in Norman Public Schools in Oklahoma, worked for a stint in higher ed in Las Vegas, then worked for two different school districts in North Carolina, so one in Henderson, North Carolina, and one in Wake County, then New Orleans, and now I'm here in Memphis. And all that to say, some of these districts only had 10 schools. Some of them, I think Memphis is the biggest with about 350 schools, as we're going to see in a minute. But in every case, families always wanted to know what are the best options for my child and how can I get them there? And it's just one of the most important questions a family can ask, one that we work really hard at the Memphis Education Fund to find good answers to, and in a city with as much to offer, but also with just as many choices as Memphis. I think the Memphis School Guide is a really important way to kind of make that question a little less daunting for families and a little bit easier to answer. So just to talk a little bit about the game plan for tonight, we're going to start with just actually a quick vocabulary lesson. So how does the Memphis School Guide actually grade the schools? We're going to talk a little bit about what are the different types of schools in Memphis, because there are a lot of types of schools in Memphis. We're going to do a quick tour of kind of some of the surface information on the Memphis School Guide. Then we're going to do a really deep dive on the data, the actual school grades and performance that it shows. Do a quick section on just what it looks like to actually use the guide to try and narrow down this list of schools to make a great choice. Have a short Q&A session, and then we'll do a closing. All right, and hello, I think I'm Marquita, Robin, and Bailey. Great to have you with us tonight.
Hey. Hello.
All right, and just so you guys know, we are on Facebook Live as well, so you guys are with me and also with the internet at the moment. And this is perfect timing. I was just going over the game plan, so we're about to jump into the first piece. How does the Memphis School Guide grade its schools? And so just the three definitions I think are really important to understand before we open the website are what are the differences between achievement, growth, and ready graduate, which only applies to high schools. And so when we talk about achievement, we are really talking about how do students at that school do on the end of state test. So TCAP or TN ready. And that number that you see for achievement, and we'll have an example in a minute, is just at that school, how many students, when they sat down and took their state test, showed that they were on grade level or higher. Between 0% of students at the school, hopefully you never see that, and 100% of students at the school, which is always the goal that we're pushing for. So a little bit different from achievement is we're talking about growth. So this isn't necessarily how well the students are doing on that test, but how much they've improved compared to last year. And Tennessee measures this in an interesting way. They call it TVAS. I think it's the Tennessee Value Added something, a Tennessee Value Added Assessment Score. But the big thing to know about that is that it's saying in 1 year at this school, are students learning on average as much as they would be expected to in one school year, less than they would be expected to learn in one school year, or more than they would normally be expected to learn in one school year. And it's given a pretty simple 1 through 5 rating, with 5 being the highest, saying students here are on average learning more than they would in 1 year than they would at other schools in the area. And finally, Ready Graduate is an interesting one, and it's different from just the graduation rate of the school. So Ready Graduate is a score that Tennessee gives to schools saying what percent of the graduating seniors, based on a couple of things, are ready for a college or career. And there's a few ways students can be considered ready graduates. One is certain scores on the ACT. One is, have they, enrolled in like a trade program, for instance, at Southwest College. One is even like, have they chosen to enlist in the military and started that career path? So basically, it's just measuring, have these students made a plan for what they're going to do in their first year out of high school? Just to give an example, because I think it's always helpful to see these definitions in real time. I always use the Central High School as an example because it's the high school in my zip code. But so if we look at Central High, we can see all of these stats that we just talked about and a few extra ones. So we can see that while Central High has about 29% of students every year showing that they're on grade level in English, about 16% of students showing that they're on grade level in math. That's unfortunate. I think it's honestly lower than we'd like to see. On the other hand, you also see that 5 out of 5 growth rate, meaning that maybe a lot of students get to Central a little bit behind grade level, but on average, Central High School is doing a lot to help those students progress in a single year. Suspension rate and chronic absenteeism, while there's not necessarily a gold standard for what's a good or what's a bad suspension rate and chronic absenteeism, I think it's just always important to know. I think it says a lot about the culture of the school, and especially when we show how to compare schools later in the school guide. I think if you see that one school has a much higher suspension rate, one school has a much lower one, that just maybe tells you something about that school that isn't captured just in the test data. And then we see at the bottom, so only high schools, will have these bottom scores. On average, what are they scoring on the ACT? What is that graduation rate? And then within those students who are graduating, what percent of them have kind of that post-secondary plan ready to go? Again, whether it's college, career, military. So we see it Central High, that's about 30%. This is the last slide before we actually get into the website, but it's one I've found people have a lot of questions about because as far as I know, Memphis has more types of schools than almost any school district in America. So we'll kind of get into what those are. And the first one that I think everyone's pretty familiar with is just a traditional public school. So because I live at this address on this street, my child is zoned to this elementary school, this middle school, and this high school. And nearly every address in Memphis has a school that your child is automatically enrolled in if you want to, that they can go to and graduate. But what's really unique and exceptional about Memphis is how many other options exist in the city. So we also have optional programs. So these are still public schools, but they have kind of special programs within them. Oftentimes they're gifted and talented programs, but I think some of the optional schools in Memphis are also music oriented, gifted and talented, arts oriented. And then I think the majority of the rest are kind of just that pure academic optional. But so these are schools where even if you're not zoned to them, you could apply to get into the optional program at that school. Public charter schools in Memphis are also public schools, also free. You don't pay tuition or anything, but they're actually not directly run by Shelby County Schools. So they're technically nonprofits that kind of run themselves independently. So while Shelby County Schools like makes the rules for these schools, they still have to follow all the same, laws that exist in Tennessee. The principals and the teachers that work there are hired directly by that public charter school. So they're employees of them first rather than being employees of Shelby County Schools. They kind of get to plan their own day-to-day operations. And public charter schools tend to start up when a school leader says, hey, I think I can do something a little different or maybe even a little better than what is happening at just the traditional SCS schools. And then they actually get money from the district to try that out. Public I-zone schools are traditionally, they were the lower performing schools in Memphis, although that's not always the case today, as we'll see when we get to the school guide. What these were was Memphis essentially looked at some of its lowest performing schools about 5-6 years ago, started giving them extra funding, extra resources, and added time to their school day. And now all of those schools are called the I-zone or innovation zone schools. The second to last bullet is pretty unique because only Memphis and Nashville have these achievement school district schools. So these were also historically low performing schools in Memphis that were actually, and just to be straightforward, taken over by the state of Tennessee. So they were essentially removed from Shelby County schools for being so low performing. And the state said, we're going to come up with a new plan for this school. Some of those schools became charter schools. In fact, the majority of them became charter schools, although they're not Shelby County charters. They're kind of their own designation of achievement school district charters. Some of them are actually run directly by the state of Tennessee. And the last category that I think people are usually pretty familiar with is private schools. So these are the only one on this list that are not in some way sponsored by either the school district or the state, entirely privately run. They do charge tuition rather than being supported with tax dollars. And in Memphis, they're a mix of some are religiously affiliated, some are not, some are secular or not tied to any particular church. Some are co-ed, some are all boys or all girls. And again, all that information is stuff that we're going to show as we get through the school guide. So those first two lines were kind of a lot. Even though I say there's a Q&A session at the end, I also like to pause here since we've just gone over a bunch of like vocabulary to see if there are any questions on the Zoom before I actually move to the Memphis School Guide website.
So far, so good.
Cool. I think this is the good part. And Teresina, can you just confirm as I do the screen share, are y'all now looking at the Memphis School Guide instead of
Yes, we are.
slides? Great.
We are.
So this is the tool that the Memphis Education Fund has been working to update, and is going to keep updating for families in Memphis to show, just what is happening with the schools and make it a little bit easier for you to look at your choices and ultimately enroll your child in the school of your choice. So there are a lot of different things happening on this page, some of which I'm going to go really deep into and some of which I'm not. A few features we are just really proud of. One is this Spanish translation button. So whether you're a Spanish speaking family or maybe you just have friends who want this information and haven't been able to get it in a really high quality way, we're really proud of the fact that very recently we made it so that you can actually translate all of these different pages into Spanish. So it's not just the home page. If I click on any of these, the translation will continue moving forward. My Spanish is not great. It is very much capped out after freshman year of high school. So I'm going to stick with the English version of the guide for the rest of this live stream. Cool. And so on this homepage, we have all these kind of informational pages. So what makes a good school? What are my choices? How do I enroll? Extra credit, which is a lot of like kind of trivia. Because some of these pages are so extensive and have a lot of great information, but also just a lot of information, I won't go through all of it today. And you can see some of it we've already talked about just in that little mini lesson we did on the types of schools. But if you had more questions or wanted more information, the website is just chock full of these links that just talk more about what the different types of schools in Memphis are. They'll go more into depth about the optional programs, about achievement versus growth. And I would recommend just spending some time on your own to look through all of these different resources. Quick plug too, at the bottom of the page, we do just keep kind of a constant social media feed that's related to just school choice and also just all other things related to school choice in Memphis. But where I want to spend the majority of our time today is actually looking at the school guide itself. And so there are two different versions of this, the feeder patterns and the school guide. I think today I'm going to start with kind of the original school guide side of things. And you can tell I was using it recently, so it's actually already got some filters set. So I'm going to clear those. And what you'll see is if I don't start filtering it out, I have this list of 350 schools in Memphis. And if I wanted to look at a map view, this is what parents are facing when they try and make a decision about where to send, their child to school. And I think anyone would be overwhelmed with this level of choice and how much information and how many differences there are between each of these schools. So our whole goal with this school guide is to make it easier for a family to say, okay, within this list of 350, what's the right choice for my student? And so I would start with just showing one way you could start filtering these out. And then I always like kind of calling the audience to give me an example too. But I like to start with a middle schooler. So let's say my child's about to finish up 5th grade. So they're about to finish up elementary school. I'd like to know my choices for their 6th grade year. Right now, I'm okay with any type of school. And for my neighborhood, let's see. I'm going to say, for this example, I'm going to narrow it down to Fraser, just because I've been spending a lot of time there recently for work. And so these are my only filters so far. 6th grade, going into middle school, in the Fraser community, so that I know whereabouts I'm driving. You can also enter your address, which is also a good option, especially if you know that you live on kind of the border between two neighborhoods. But so I apply this, and now my life's gotten a little easier in terms of knowing my choices. Now, instead of 350 schools, I'm only looking at 7 schools.
That's awesome.
But within that, I mean, if I'm a parent, this probably raises a few questions. One thing I always like to do is start by sorting them in order. So you can either do growth or achievement and kind of stack them. And if I'm a parent, this raises like a couple different questions. One is, am I happy with the growth and achievement that I see in these schools? Every parent needs to kind of come to their own conclusion, I think, in what they're looking for. I would say these are probably lower achievement and growth scores than I would like to see, just to be really frank there. And then I also see, interestingly, some schools don't have scores, and there's a reason for that. So in the case of Compass Fraser, this is actually a very new school. In fact, I bet if I go to their page, it's probably going to be mostly blank. So a little bit of information, but not a ton. So new school that opened will have a little bit less information. I also don't see any data for New Hope Christian Academy. That's because private schools actually aren't required to take end of state testing, and so they're not required to post anything, although we do give them the option of posting things. And then you can also see, notice this is a school that's been around for a little bit longer. So schools are actually able to go in and upload more information, whether that's extracurriculars, whether that's photos, ways to contact the principal, or even leave reviews. So I like showing this to families, and just to highlight, this is actually not info that we necessarily provide. We go to the schools and ask them to share more information. But what we do give you is the growth and the achievement. So know that whatever this says, you can trust that data because it's coming from us, which is in turn coming directly from test results. And just to show another example, so MBA, again, isn't just showing the scores. All of this is information that the principal of the school has shared with us and said, hey, we'd also like to see, we'd also like to let families know that we have a theme. We teach a business, economics, financial literacy, and STEM curriculum. We offer Spanish and ESL. These are hours. We have uniforms. Just, I think, all information that's really helpful for families to know. So here is where I'm going to ask if anyone will be a brave volunteer and give me a sample student. It doesn't have to necessarily be your real life child, but if you were going to kind of start this from scratch, kind of clear all the filters again, I think it's just interesting to like look at a new maybe grade level, look at a new neighborhood and see how does that change the options. And you can either come off mute or you can type that in the chat.
'11th grade.
All right.
Traditional, optional, and Whitehaven area. Well, that would be, I would guess, South Memphis.
And we can, it's not, we don't necessarily have every neighborhood listed. I might actually, for this one, let's keep it on any, and then we can switch to the map view. And that's also a good way to just make sure that we're looking directly at Whitehaven. So now I can kind of zoom in and say, so y'all can see, even though it's not necessarily listed as a category, because we have it placed on the map, we can see what those options are in Whitehaven. And so we see we have this Southwest Career and Tech Center. And just to highlight again, so this I think is kind of a, not alternative school is the wrong word, but like a tech school. So it doesn't necessarily
It's
take
CPE,
the
career and technology.
Yeah, so that's why this school, again, doesn't necessarily have to take the same state test as other school and doesn't have anything for that performance score. Versus the other schools in Whitehaven that do. And so we have Pathways Whitehaven, growth score of 2, achievement level of 7%, and Whitehaven High, growth score of 5, achievement level of 23%. And so I like this as like a very clear-cut example where if I'm a family who maybe lives in the Whitehaven area or is moving to the Whitehaven area, has a rising 11th grader, potentially I'm interested in this one if I just know that career and tech is something that my child's interested in. But if I know that they want to do kind of more the traditional high school route, this is one where it's like a pretty easy choice. I would probably pick Whitehaven High in this case over the Pathways Whitehaven High School. I also like the map view because I think I mentioned earlier, like some families might live maybe on like the border of 2 school districts or 2 neighborhoods. And it's a way to see, okay, actually it's not that far of a drive to Oakhaven High, or maybe I work in downtown Memphis, so I know, okay, I'm going to pass some of these schools on the way to work. So that would be a good option too. Always love to plug Hollis F. Price Middle College. You can see they've got that growth score of 5, 41% achievement, which is really high. But so this is just kind of the lay of the land for using the Memphis School Guide. Do want to quickly show another way to see the school guide that we're kind of test driving in beta form a little bit. So when we went to the guide, you guys saw there were 2 options. There was the school guide, and then there were also these feeder patterns. I just want to look at really quickly what it means to be a feeder pattern. So this one will take just a minute to load, but a feeder pattern is basically, if I were to live in the same house for 18 years and my address never changed, I would, in theory, know the elementary school, the middle school, and the high school that my child is going to attend from the time they turn 5 to the time they turn 18 and graduate. And so what this is, you can see you kind of scroll through it and it shows by high school, sort of the different areas and neighborhoods in Memphis and where students sort of feed through. And it can't necessarily tell your child's exact elementary and middle school, although there is a link to do that right here. But it can kind of show you that general pathway. And I'll actually do that real quick. So I'm going to go to my neighborhood school. So this is actually part of the SCS website. And I'm just moving some stuff out of the way on Zoom. And let's say I want to answer that question that I just mentioned. Based on where I live, where would my child, in theory, attend elementary school, middle school, and high school? Just for the example, I'm going to use 160 South Hollywood. So that's actually where the central office of SCS is. But just by typing in an address, it lets us kind of build that list. So if someone were to actually live inside of SCS's central office for whatever reason, their child would attend Idlewild, then Sherwood, then Central. And so the way we kind of see that feeder pattern, we could try and find Central in all of this. And if I know my map of Memphis really well, maybe that works. It's probably a little bit easier is just to scroll down to Central High School. And this will take a moment to load. But what I'm going to see now is instead of just looking at one school at a time, here we go, now it's loading. It's going to kind of show me that pathway or that pattern, and that's why it's called a feeder pattern, that my child would follow all the way from their first day at Idlewild, I think it was. Where is it? So I can see both my child's elementary school and all the other elementary schools that feed into Central High eventually. I can follow that to the middle school. So I think it was Sherwood in this case. And it's an interesting case where maybe I see Sherwood Middle School is, performing at a certain rate. Snowden's actually in my neighborhood. Maybe I explore ways to have my child attend Snowden instead, all the way into where they'll eventually feed into Central High School. And at the very bottom, it also shows charter schools. I think we picked a 3-mile radius for this. So if you did look through all kind of the neighborhood options and said, I'm not happy with those, or they're okay, but I'd like to know more, this is just showing you that there are also some charter schools in your area. For this one, it looks like it's, again, 3 brand new schools, so they don't have data available. All of the campus schools opened about the same time. Beacon's a pretty new school. Crosstown High and Memphis Academy of Sciences and Engineering. And you can just kind of compare all those numbers. I think the last thing I would add before I get out of this, because I know I've kind of thrown a lot at you guys, is let's say I only have 5 minutes to look at the guide, but I want to just save some stuff for later. And I think this is something that I know Ms. Renee on the call has done before. I'm going to just take all my filters away. Sort by, let's say, achievement. And I'm just going to say, I just want to know more about all these schools later, but I don't have any time to read about them right now. Clicking those stars will save them so that I can actually leave the page, go back to the Memphis School Guide later. Let it load a little bit. And now maybe, I've just finished my shift at work, or maybe the kids are asleep and I have a little bit more time to actually read those pages, I can just go back to my favorites. And now they're all just in that one neat little place where I've saved them. Cool. So with that, we've toured the general information pages. We've kind of done a demo on the school guide and seen a little bit of the data. With number 5, how to select the school that's right for your child. That's just a complicated question, but since I have them on the call, I always want to shout out the Memphis Lift. Actually offers choice counseling where you can reach out to them and say, hey, I've maybe like gotten my list of 10 schools from the Memphis School Guide. Can you guys help me figure out how to narrow that list of 10 down to like maybe my top 2 or 3? And then how do I actually enroll my child? Because the Memphis School Guide does have some pages for that. It'll actually take you directly to the enrollment pages for a lot of different schools. But in my head, there's nothing as good as having, a real person there to kind of guide you through step by step the enrollment process. And with there, I'll pause again for a quick Q&A and just ask, are there any kind of questions or thoughts from the crowd?
Well, I'm just thinking, I like the way you presented that, because after there will be some parents that will actually go on here and find their schools for themselves, and they will need help with narrowing it down. And the Memphis Lift can help them with that. Just like you said, I like that thought.
So on this guide, we are able to look at every school in Memphis, Tennessee.
Absolutely.
Every school in Memphis
County.
And also in Shelby County, yeah. So it does extend. It includes private schools, and it also includes schools in the suburbs like Germantown, Lakeland, Arlington.
And it also a breakdown that is charter, or it's a school that we need, like an optional school. Like it also say optional, meaning that we need to sign up before we had to get elected to get in, selected. Our children had to be selected to get in the school. Would also have those schools on there?
It will, and I think I'm gonna go to one as an example, because I think that's an important point, right? That some of these have kind of special processes to get in. Mm-hmm. So I'll like go to the campus school for an example. The campus school is a school that's actually like hosted by the University of Memphis, which means that no student is zoned to go there, and it would have its own kind of special enrollment process. And with that, you can click on the How Do I Enroll button, but that's actually not school specific. It's kind of like general enrollment tips. But you can also go straight to the school website. And most schools, somewhere front and center on their page, have a spot saying, yeah, boom, you still have time, apply now. Although I think that might be applying to the University of Memphis, not just, so. I'm seeing if there is just an enrollment button. But that's my recommendation if it's a charter school or if it's kind of a specialized school like this, to actually go to their website, where usually you'll see some kind of like, oh, here we go, apply. And so unfortunately in this case, you can see that enrollment for fall 2021 is closed, but if I'm excited about that school, or maybe I'm looking at this a year ahead of time, now I know this is a school and I know how to get to its application. And then same thing if I get now out of the favorite schools list. Any of these schools, you can see here, it says what type of school they are. Is it a public school but an optional school? Is it a public school but a charter school? And just using Bluff City High School as a charter school example. I can go visit the school website, see the enrollment. In this case, the schools actually also entered a little bit of information, just letting you know how do you apply. You can tell from this that the school maybe hasn't updated this in a little while, because it looks like the last time they talked about the enrollment process was 2017. So I would probably just double check it and actually go to their website, where again, most schools try to make it pretty easy, and there's boom, an enroll now button right there to help you out. Just a couple of closing and thanks. First, just thank you to everyone who attended tonight. We're very proud of the memphisschoolguide.org, so please use it. Again, the Memphis School Guide is actually operated by my team here at the Memphis Education Fund. We always say, please follow our social media, sign up for our newsletter. It's just a great way to see what is happening in Memphis with education news, and to see, you know, what should you be really excited about? What should you maybe be paying attention to let your, you know, school board member know that you're paying attention to it? So all the interesting happenings with Memphis education. And of course, thank you to the Memphis Lift, who has done just an enormous amount of work, both helping us think through what this site needs to be helpful to parents. And like I said, also just does an incredible job actually helping families, you know, make those final decisions about the best school for their child and actually get them enrolled. With that, I'll just close out with, you know, the Memphis Education Fund is really excited to keep working with students and families in Memphis. Right now, we are really committed to making sure there are more school choices available in Memphis, and that all of those choices are higher quality. Making sure that there is plenty of learning time for your children, especially as we think about not the rest of this year, but next year, when we'll hopefully, knock on wood, have everyone in schools because it's safe. And also just always battling to get more funding to Memphis schools. We're gonna do everything we can to make sure that the schools your children attend are in the best possible condition they can be. And with that, I will, you know, kind of close out and also say thank you to all of you guys for attending tonight.